Please.
We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. No bull, no spin. Now imagine getting your news like that. Just give it to me straight. ABC News, straightforward.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, free on Apple Podcasts.
From the rubble, a 3-year-old is rescued after being trapped for nearly 3 days. Authorities say she has no serious injuries. Meanwhile, here at home, anticipation is mounting for the political earthquake that's about to rumble less than 24 hours from now when the first polls close. Sprint to the finish on Election Day Eve, the Trump and Biden campaigns focusing in on those battleground states. The president seemingly issuing a threat to at least one of those key states as he encourages his supporters who are pulling dangerously aggressive maneuvers on the roads and blocking traffic. Meanwhile, back in Washington, preparations are underway for possible protests tomorrow with a non-scalable fence being installed around the White House. Going all in on Pennsylvania, Joe Biden in his hometown state trying to turn out the vote. Former President Obama campaigning in Georgia, slamming President Trump for suggesting he may fire Dr. Anthony Fauci. Obama calling it Trump's, quote, second-term plan. New coronavirus cases reaching nearly 100,000 in just 24 hours, with COVID now on the rise in 47 states. Police breaking up illegal Halloween parties here in New York. And in Utah, organizers face possible charges for a Halloween event that drew thousands. The path to 270, with nearly 100 million ballots already cast, what you need to know about the Electoral College and what's in play tomorrow night. And some perspective from around the globe. Civil unrest in Thailand as a wave of resistance to the king, something once thought unimaginable, has taken hold of the country. We'll take you there. And why your cell phone has been blowing up with political texts and what you can do to stop them. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. Millions have been counting down to this moment for months, maybe even years for some. And now Election Eve is finally upon us. This time tomorrow, the nation will be standing by for the results to start coming in for what is being billed as the most consequential presidential election of our lifetime. Well, some are just about ready for it all to be over. We will be right here throughout the day and night and the days ahead, crunching the numbers and making sense of the results and what they mean for the future of our country. The candidates crisscrossing key battleground states today, and this their final full day of campaigning. President Trump holding 5 rallies in 4 states that he won 4 years ago, working to turn out his most enthusiastic supporters. Joe Biden focused on the key swing state of Pennsylvania today, hoping to restore the Midwestern blue wall the Democrats lost in 2016. Our team is fanned out across the country. Our chief White House correspondent, Jonathan Karl, leads us off.
President Trump may be down in the polls, but he's looking confident and predicting victory.
This does not look like a second-place finish.
He's making a frenzied final push, one rally after another, drawing some of his biggest and most enthusiastic crowds.
We have 5 of these today, 5. We have some big ones. Thank you. Thank you.
It extends beyond the rallies. In New York, Trump supporters took over the Mario Cuomo Bridge. In Texas, they menaced a Biden campaign bus on the highway. The FBI is now investigating, but the president praised his supporters.
Do you see the way our people, they were protecting his bus yesterday because they're nice.
In the final hours of the campaign, the president is barely mentioning the pandemic. And he's lashing out at Dr. Anthony Fauci, the nation's leading expert on coronavirus. Fauci told the Washington Post Joe Biden's campaign, quote, is taking it seriously from a public health perspective. Trump, Fauci said, is looking at it from a different perspective, the economy and reopening the country. In Florida on Sunday, the president responded to chants of fire Fauci by suggesting that's exactly what he'll try to do after the election.
Don't tell anybody, but let me wait till a little bit after the election.
In a year where early and mail-in voting have shattered records, the Trump campaign is counting on a big Election Day turnout operation, building on those crowds at his rallies.
Tomorrow you have the power to do so much for our country. You have the power to vote. So go out and vote. Unless you're going to vote for somebody other than me, in which case, sit it out that way.
Confident or not, the president is still making totally unfounded accusations that the election is being stolen from him.
Especially when you know what goes on in Philadelphia, and it's been going on for years. So, Governor, open up your state, and please don't cheat, Governor. Please don't cheat.
But Pennsylvania's top election official has urged voters, quote, not to be distracted by the hype or the disinformation. Pennsylvania doesn't even begin processing its mail-in ballots until tomorrow. It's expected to last for several days.
I think it's a terrible thing when people or states are allowed to tabulate ballots for a long period of time after the election is over.
But today, Ohio's Secretary of State, a Republican, told ABC's Powerhouse Politics podcast that the counting always continues until every vote is counted, a process that takes time.
The election night results are never final. That's not the way that elections work.
President Trump has invited some 400 guests to the White House tomorrow to watch election returns. Today, barriers are going up, walling off the complex to the world outside.
The White House certainly taking some extra safety precautions. Jonathan Karl joins us now. John, we heard the president there demanding that we know the election results tomorrow night, but we're seeing election officials on both sides of the aisle pushing back on that.
We sure are, Lindsay. Look, it's a fundamental principle of American democracy that every vote counts. And as the Republican Secretary of State in Ohio told me today, they will take time to count all of those votes just like they always do.
And John, on this, the final full day of campaigning, the president was certainly feeding off of those rally crowds. It seems like he's really focused on turning out that base of the most enthusiastic supporters. But does his administration think that that's enough to pull out a win?
My sense is that, well, first of all, there's plenty of bravado from the Trump side. They say they're going to win. They talk about all the states they're going to carry. But when you really talk to his top advisors, my sense is that they believe they can pull this off. They know the odds are against them, but they believe that their turnout operation that they have invested heavily in, the Republican Party has invested heavily in over the past 3.5 years, that they think they can pull this off. But, Lindsay, there's no question that they see the same polls that you and I see. They see even more polls, and they know the odds are against them.
Jonathan Karl, thanks so much. And now to the Biden campaign. The former vice president campaigning today in Ohio and Pennsylvania, trying to win back the state where he was born. Joe Biden once again making his case against the president's handling of the pandemic. ABC's Mary Bruce is with the Biden campaign in Pittsburgh with the latest.
Joe Biden heading out for his last frenzied day of campaigning, ready to go. Biden starting the day in Ohio, a sign the campaign thinks the red state is up for grabs.
Tomorrow we have an opportunity to put an end to a presidency that's divided this nation.
Then the boy from Scranton off to the state that could decide this election, Pennsylvania. From the beginning of this campaign, Biden's played up his roots here, but the race is tightening. Biden with a steady but slim lead.
How are you feeling, Mr. Vice President?
Feel like you can win Ohio?
Tell me, Pennsylvania, are you ready to vote?
Today, the Biden campaign spread out in every corner of the Keystone State.
We're all here. And this is Biden country, isn't it?
The candidate holding 3 back-to-back drive-in rallies near Pittsburgh.
We're going to win Pennsylvania, and we're going to show the world what America stands for.
Trump won Pennsylvania by less than a point 4 years ago. In rural Bedford County, his supporters like Stacey Schreiber as passionate as ever.
I'm definitely a Trump supporter, and I'll be voting for President Trump again, like I did in 2016.
Biden is hoping to make inroads with suburban and urban voters.
I'll be happy when it's over with. I'm really tired of all the BS. I can't stand Trump.
Pennsylvania, part of that blue wall Trump smashed through in 2016 that Biden is now trying to rebuild. Another one of those states, Michigan. Biden campaigning there Saturday with his heaviest hitter, former President Obama.
Detroit, Joe Biden is my brother. I love Joe Biden. He will be a great president.
Obama back out today in Florida and Georgia, a state Biden's team thinks is increasingly competitive. And he's blasting Trump for saying he might fire Dr. Anthony Fauci.
One of the few people in this administration who's been taking this seriously all along, and what did he say? His second-term plan is to fire that guy.
Biden says he has a better idea.
Elect me and I'm going to hire Dr. Fauci. And we're going to fire Donald Trump.
And as the president says ballots arriving after Election Day shouldn't be counted, Biden telling Americans it's not up to him.
The power to change the country is in your hands. I don't care how much Donald Trump tries. There's nothing he's going to do to stop the people in this nation from voting. It's time for Donald Trump to pack his bags and go home. We're done.
Biden certainly ready to send Trump packing. We'll see what the voters have to say about that tomorrow. Mary Bruce joins us now from Pittsburgh. Mary, the Biden campaign has tried to widen the map a bit in recent days, but it seems like ultimately all roads lead back to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, trying to expand the map, but not ignoring these traditional battlegrounds and trying to rebuild that blue wall. Today, they absolutely barnstormed this state. All four principals scattered out across Pennsylvania. This, of course, is Biden's hometown. He has been making that blue-collar pitch to voters here since the beginning of this campaign. And while this great state is critical, his campaign says it is not a must-win for the Biden team, as it may be for President Trump. And that's because tonight, Joe Biden's campaign says they have multiple pathways to get to 270, including some that don't include Pennsylvania. Lindsay.
And the Biden campaign also responding to concerns that the president may try to prematurely declare victory tomorrow night before all of the votes are counted. What are they saying about that specifically, and what will they be watching for tomorrow night as the results are coming in?
They are definitely setting expectations tonight, Lindsay. The Biden campaign saying just because President Trump may come out and try to declare victory early, that does not mean that is the case. In fact, they say that President Trump will likely have to outperform in many of the states that he won in 2016. They say flatly, if President Trump comes out early tomorrow night and declares victory, they say that is just not going to be the case. Lindsay.
Mary Bruce, our thanks to you. And now we turn to the always hotly contested state of Florida. With its 29 electoral votes, the Sunshine State is a must-win for the president and could seal a Biden presidency. In 2016, President Trump won Florida by less than 2%, but the ever-changing population there and the pandemic has disrupted the dynamics in this swing state even further. Let's go to ABC's Victor Akendo, who is in Orlando, Florida. And Victor, you've been on the ground covering COVID in Florida, which has consistently seen some high infection rates. Having won by such a small margin last election, how tight of a toss-up is it really between the two candidates, and how big of a role will COVID play?
Well, Lindsay, nobody ever wins Florida by a wide margin, and in that regard, this election is no different. COVID-19 is, of course, top of mind, but for many different reasons. Just today, Florida surpassed 17,000 lives lost to the virus, and Florida has already botched 2 reopenings, at one point becoming the epicenter of a worldwide pandemic, and I've spoken with plenty of people who feel let down by leadership at every level. One voter in the Villages, not far away from us here in Orlando, that's the largest retirement community in the country. That voter telling me that he gives President Trump a big fat F on his response to the pandemic. But you can't ignore the economic impact this has had. I've also spoken with small business owners or from bars and restaurants who are definitely fearful of another shutdown. And unfortunately, Lindsay, cases are climbing once again.
And of course, you're in Orlando, which is right along the infamous I-4 corridor. I want you to zero in on the senior vote and the Latino vote in particular. How are both candidates targeting these two groups to their advantage, and does either have an edge?
Well, Lindsay, here along Florida's famed I-4 corridor, it's a very diverse voting landscape. You have big cities like Orlando and Tampa, but then you go out to the suburbs, and that's where President Trump did so well in 2016. We just talked about COVID-19. That group hit especially hard by the pandemic. And that has created a little bit of space here for Joe Biden to make some serious inroads. As for the Latino vote, the biggest voting group in the state, Cuban Americans, they are leaning toward President Trump, but not all Latinos vote the same way. Joe Biden needs support from other groups like Puerto Ricans, for example, who feel disheartened by the president's response to Hurricane Maria to turn out. Lindsay?
Yeah, Latinos certainly not a monolith there. Victor Oquendo in Orlando, our thanks to you. And turning now to Texas, where turnout is shattering records. More people have already voted early than in the entire 2016 election in Texas. That enthusiasm has Democrats hoping that they can turn this reliably red state blue for the first time since 1976. But some of those votes in Democratic-leaning Houston were at the center of several Republican lawsuits, and that's where our Marcus Moore is. So, Marcus, let's start right out with those 127,000 votes in Harris County. Republicans wanted them tossed out. Explain what happened today.
Well, Lindsay, we're talking about votes that were cast at drive-through polling stations here in Harris County and at 10 different locations. This is a county that is heavily Democratic, and 127,000 approximately of those votes the Republicans wanted to have thrown out because they said that they violated state laws by the fact that they were ballots that were cast at drive-through locations. And so these cases were brought to several judges, including the Texas Supreme Court, and this morning a federal judge. All of these judges are ruling the same, that these votes will be counted, that they were lawful, and that's exactly what Democrats have been wanting to hear. In fact, critics, Lindsay, of this effort to have those votes thrown out have called it simply voter suppression, or an example of voter suppression in this election. Lindsay, important to also point out that Republicans have appealed the judge's decision, so we'll see what happens in the days ahead.
And Marcus, Texas, of course, has the second highest COVID death toll of any state. But there have been battles over masks at a major Texan city. El Paso is currently under lockdown as we speak. So how's the pandemic influencing the vote there?
Well, you know, Lindsay, all of this, first of all, is happening under the umbrella, the shadow, if you will, of COVID-19. It has changed the way, or impacted the way people are voting. I talked to a number of voters who said they wanted to vote early because they felt like there would be fewer people and they wouldn't be in a crowd. And then there's a sense that the whole COVID-19 situation and the way the Trump administration has responded has been a catalyst for people's decision to vote. And Lindsay, I've heard from people on both sides, some of them saying that they are completely unhappy with the way the Trump administration has handled this, while others have said, who could have predicted that this would happen, and who knows if another administration could have done a better job. So certainly there is a sense that this COVID-19 pandemic and all of the lives that have been lost is influencing people's decision to vote and how they do it. And Lindsay, a lot of people will be watching tomorrow to see how Election Day unfolds here in Texas.
Exactly right. Marcus, thank you so much. And let's head back now to the Southeast. Georgia on our minds. Much like Texas, Georgia has long been a Republican stronghold. The last time a Democrat turned the state blue was in a presidential campaign was fellow Southerner Bill Clinton. We'll certainly see if anything changes there tomorrow. Former President Obama stopped by Atlanta today, where he held a drive-in rally and called the last 4 years a, quote, failure. Let's go now to TJ Holmes, who is in ATL for us. So, TJ, Georgia has been certainly hit pretty hard by the pandemic, and over the summer we saw major interstates shut down by protesters in the wake of social justice uprisings. It would seem that COVID and racial justice are both certainly going to have a major impact on the ballot there.
Oh, absolutely, and that wasn't lost on me as well. Georgia on our minds. I caught what you did there, Lindsay. But of course, yes, it's on the minds of a lot of voters. Of course, we're in the midst of two pandemics. Of course, the COVID pandemic and a racial inequality pandemic, a lot of people would argue. And certainly, Atlanta has been a place that has seen the police shooting of Rayshard Brooks. Of course, the Ahmaud Arbery case happened here in Georgia as well. We saw protests in the streets over that. And of course, the numbers here for COVID cases still going up here in in Georgia. They're getting close to now 8,000 deaths, and they're seeing their cases go up. So those two things are on people's minds, of course, as they are deciding to vote. And this is important for Democrats and Republicans, is to get new voters, to get people who didn't vote last time engaged this time. And there are indicators of that. And a lot of that driving force, possibly, Lindsay, is people are upset about something, right? I was talking to a director, an activist earlier, and say, how do you get people involved in activism? You find something that you're mad about, and then you do something about it. Well, Lindsay, folks here in Georgia, and certainly around the country as well, have a couple of things to be mad about, and we'll see how that might pay off for Democrats and Republicans on Election Day tomorrow.
Yeah, many there are mad about COVID-19, or COVID-16-19 as it's been called. So just north of you in Gwinnett County, officials are saying that they have seen a 543% increase in absentee voters this year. And that number is only expected to rise. But of course, this is the state where Stacey Abrams called foul a few years ago in the gubernatorial race. Georgia has been plagued with allegations of voter disenfranchisement. What are you hearing about the steps being taken in order to ensure a smooth and legitimate election there?
Well, I don't know how much confidence people will have in the process. This is a state that has been plagued for years and years. And we talked about Stacey Abrams a couple years ago and what happened in her race. But just this summer in the primary here in Georgia, they had what I guess is called, the official name for it was a hot mess in terms of their primary here. It was plagued by all kinds of issues. The long lines caused by these new voting machines that weren't working, not enough polling places that were open, not enough polling workers who knew how to run the machines, just a mess. So that was kind of the dry run for what we're supposed to see tomorrow. Now, the Secretary of State here assures us there's going to be more polling places. They do have more poll workers. They've worked out some of those kinks. And also, some of the slowdowns in the long lines have to do with some of the pandemic policies that have been put in place to have to clean things and slow things down. But also, Lindsay, that has not stopped people from coming out. They're coming out early, despite the pandemics, despite the long lines. They are not letting anything get in the way of them placing their vote this time around for this consequential election. So Secretary of State says, yes, things are in place, but a lot of voters, they don't care what mess goes on, how difficult it is, how long it takes. They are proving already they will show up. 3.9 million votes already cast, Lindsay, already before Election Day. The total in 2016 was 4.1 million. So even before Election Day, they've already gotten close to the total. That just gives you an indication of how engaged people here are.
And they're certainly trying to make sure they don't have, what do you call it, the official name again, a hot mess. They do not want that again. TJ
Yes.
Holmes in Atlanta.
That's an official term, Lindsay.
I'll be using that, a hot mess. Thank you, TJ. And if Joe Biden is able to win one of those Sun Belt states like Georgia or Florida, the president will definitely need to keep all of the blue wall states he won last time. Wisconsin, of course, being one of them, where President Trump won in 2016 by just 27,000 votes. Deb Roberts is there. But Deb, the president is up against more than Joe Biden, really. I mean, the coronavirus is surging in that state.
It really is, Lindsay. And I tell you, the president is here tonight, or will be here shortly in Kenosha, Wisconsin, where we are, and we'll spend election night to do a last-minute campaign rally. And, you know, we've heard the president at many of his rallies talk about how we're turning the curve, right? We're rounding the corner with this virus. But it is a very interesting argument here in Wisconsin because, yes, there has been a huge surge in these cases. The cases doubled over the last month, a surge of 3,400 new cases over the last few days. It is, in some ways, kind of that invisible presence around the ballot. But the big question is going to be, is it really something that's preoccupying the minds of people here in Wisconsin? The president is gambling on the idea that people really want to talk about jobs and the economy and other things besides the pandemic. But the vice president, when he was here, he spoke mostly about this pandemic and the people who are at risk and, you know, these rural areas where you've seen spikes, particularly amongst older people. So the big question, and in some ways this will be a litmus test here to see, is this something that people are really worried about, or as the president is gambling, are people more worried about kitchen table issues and not really wanting to just get bogged down in the coronavirus, even though it is surging in this state, Lindsay?
And Deb, as you mentioned, that you're in Kenosha, where President Trump is speaking tonight. Kenosha is, of course, where Jacob Blake was shot 7 times in the back by police officers, fueling weeks of protests and unrest there. Is there a sense that the president's law and order message is really resonating there?
It's hard to say. I mean, certainly you see plenty of evidence here of people being nervous, on edge. You see a lot of buildings that are boarded up, but you see some of them decorated with conciliatory signs about unity. So it's clearly something that is on the minds of this particular town, of people in this town. But more than anything else, the folks here tell me that if nothing else, that case probably solidified people into in their positions that they had already taken. If you're inclined to be more worried about law and order, those people really decided to cling more to President Trump's message. If you're more interested in racial justice and the social unrest that was going on, those people are thinking a little differently. So it seems to be sort of an even split in terms of whether that is preoccupying the minds of people here. And much like Wisconsin, it's very close to call. Biden is leading at this point, but folks are saying, the Democrats are saying they don't want to get too comfortable. Wisconsin is always full of surprises. I mean, it was a surprise last time when President Trump picked off the state. So will it be a surprise and go back in the other direction tomorrow night? That's, of course, what we're all waiting to see. So we will see how much it factors in, whether social justice and whether the coronavirus really have an impact here on the election tomorrow.
And just a difference of about 200 votes there in Kenosha County last time around in 2016.
Absolutely.
All right, Deborah Roberts, thanks so much. And let's bring in our ABC News political director, Rick Klein, now. So, Rick, we've just heard from our team out in those critical swing states. So what states are you watching most closely for tomorrow night? And which ones can President Trump and Joe Biden cannot afford to lose?
Yeah, Lindsay, starting with President Trump, he has to defend the Sun Belt. And he's on defense in a whole lot of states. And if you look at the map, you have states like Florida, like North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, even Texas. If President Trump loses any of those states, his coalition begins to crumble. And Joe Biden is talking about not just a win, but a big win. The flip side of that for Joe Biden, he has got to bring back that classic blue wall in the upper Midwest. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, and particularly Pennsylvania, that has to be Biden country. If he wins some combination of those states, he's on a good path. If he wins all three of those states, Joe Biden will become the next president.
And of course, we've been preparing that this could be a long election night or even a long week. But what could make it an early night on knowing the likely winner? And in what scenarios could this drag out much longer?
Yeah, looking at the time zones, there are several states that have relatively early poll closing times and also are expected to report back a good chunk of the vote fairly quickly. Looking at Florida, looking at North Carolina, looking at Georgia, even Ohio. You know, John Carl and I talked to the Secretary of State there for a Powerhouse Politics podcast just today. He said that they're going to have a lot of vote, including a lot of the early vote, very quickly. And if Biden wins any combination of those states, really any of those states, we may not be looking at someone that's got 270 electoral votes, but I think we're going to know what kind of night we have. If, on the other hand, most of those states stay red, or all of those states stay red, then it could come down to a dogfight and maybe an overtime situation in Wisconsin, Michigan, and again, Pennsylvania. We know from authorities there, they're not going to have most of the vote counted from the early vote, the people that voted early, until Wednesday at the earliest, maybe more like Thursday or Friday.
Yeah, President Trump very clear he doesn't want that overtime scenario. But so control of the Senate is also very much at stake for tomorrow night. What are the key states that Democrats are targeting to win back a majority?
The Senate very much in play. The Democrats will need to pick up a net of 3. They're expected to lose the Alabama Senate seat, so really they have to pick up some combination of 4 here. Looking at Maine, Colorado, Arizona, all places with incumbent Republican senators who are very much on the ropes. North Carolina, a similar situation. Tom Tillis hasn't led in polls for a long time. Joni Ernst in Iowa, a lot of people think that could be the critical one to make or break the majority. And then look at Georgia. This is fascinating, Lindsay. There's actually 2 races on the ballot in Georgia. Democrats are competitive in both, but there's a quirk in Georgia law. You need to get 50% of the vote there. So there are multiple candidates in both races. It's possible that Democrats snag one of those, but if they fall just short, we're talking about a runoff that isn't going to happen until January. So talk about an overtime situation. It could be a while for control of the Senate.
Oh, no. Okay. Rick Klein, thank you so much to you and our entire political team. And tomorrow night, be sure to tune into our live election coverage beginning at 7 p.m. I'll be joining George, David, and the entire team here in New York and across the battleground states. Again, our election night coverage begins at 7 p.m. Eastern tomorrow night. And this election is happening as we're seeing record-breaking new COVID-19 cases and deaths across the country. The U.S. now averaging more than 80,000 new cases every day, and there's no sign that it's slowing down. Dr. Anthony Fauci warns that during these fall and winter months, we're in for a whole lot of hurt. ABC's Steve Osunsami reports in from Atlanta tonight.
Doctors say the numbers haven't looked this concerning since the start of the pandemic, with cases rising tonight in 47 states, and the number of people dying from the disease is rising in 26 states.
The rates of growth are alarming. They seem to be as bad or worse than they were back in the spring.
Dr. Anthony Fauci tells the Washington Post that we're in for a whole lot of hurt, and we could not be positioned more poorly, with families inside from the cold and celebrating the holidays, all great conditions for spreading the coronavirus.
Hang in there. It's going to end, and a vaccine is going to be extremely helpful to us, and it is right around the corner.
It was not a happy Halloween for hundreds of people at two parties in New York over the weekend that had to be broken up by police. Most of the people were wearing costumes but weren't wearing masks.
If ever there were a holiday where masks make sense, it seems like Halloween would be it. For more now, let's bring in Steve Osunsami from Atlanta. With new cases on the rise in most of the country, particularly in those key swing states, Steve, what happens if a voter is sick or may have been exposed to the virus but still wants to vote tomorrow?
Well, it depends on the state you're in. In Iowa, for example, if you're sick with COVID-19, they are taking extra steps, allowing for voters who are sick or have a fever to vote curbside. In Pennsylvania, they're telling people if you don't wear a mask that you could be told that you have to step aside and move away from people who might be concerned. There are more than 30 states that are allowing some sort of emergency absentee voting for people who are sick with COVID-19. Lindsay.
And what's the latest status on the governor there in Georgia?
So the governor was exposed to someone who had the coronavirus and has been isolating. There has been a bit of controversy about the governor being able to vote tomorrow. Here at the CDC, officials here have sort of given him the clear, saying that it will be okay for poll workers to come in contact with him if he's wearing a mask and if he keeps his social distance. Lindsay.
All right, Steve Osunsami, thanks so much. When we come back, the teenager facing homicide charges after shooting two protesters in Kenosha following the Jacob Blake incident faces a judge in Wisconsin. We're tracking another monster hurricane, this time named Ada. It could potentially cause devastating flooding and landslides before potentially making its way here to the U.S. But up next, our behind-the-scenes look at Microsoft's War Room, where experts are working around the clock to block foreign interference in our election.
Most powerful stories of our time, anytime. Nightline. The time has finally come.
We have to win. This is the most important election in the history of our country.
I will draw on the best of us, not the worst. I will be an American president.
Who will be your next president?
I am your president of law and order.
I won't fan the flames of hate.
Election night, ABC.
We will make America great again.
This is a battle we will win, and we'll do it together.
ABC Election Night Live and on Apple News.
Cross my office off the list. What if we pick for each other?
Please stop.
Yes!
Welcome back. In this final countdown to Election Day, the stakes could not be higher for those fighting the threat of foreign interference in our election. So tonight, ABC's Tom Yamas gives us an inside look at the efforts of one company to track and prevent potential foreign interference and cyber threats online.
We're getting an exclusive look inside Microsoft's election security war room, where analysts are monitoring potential threats from around the globe to our upcoming election.
On this map, every one of these dots is the location of a computer that has been infected by a criminal syndicate so that they can control that computer to conduct their crimes. And these are just those connections in the last 30 days. In the last couple of months, we've seen actors from Russia, from Iran, and from China all increase their activity targeting different people associated with the election and the election process.
The majority of cyber attacks coming from Russia, the FBI accusing Russia of accessing multiple state and local election systems.
We are not going to tolerate foreign interference in our elections or any criminal activity that threatens the sanctity of your vote or undermines public confidence in the outcome of the election.
Cyber criminals or other countries could use ransomware to try to disrupt the election by locking up the computers that state and local officials are using to conduct the election or to count the vote or to report the outcome.
It's that kind of attack that intelligence officials worry could shake voters' confidence in the election process. And it's something former Principal Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Sue Gordon, who is consulting with the company, says keeps her up at night.
The idea that adversaries would insert themselves into our electoral process, and whether they actually affect the vote or if their actions made our citizens feel like their vote wasn't going to count, to me that is, without question, the biggest threat to our democracies.
When you talk about hacking election systems, what would they actually interfere with?
More likely, they'd get into voter registration systems, websites, move around networks that would allow them to either disrupt the communications, steal the voter registrations to be able to know who the people are and target them directly.
While she believes foreign interference is here to stay, increased cooperation between governments and tech companies puts the U.S. in a better position to combat it than 4 years ago.
When we see indications of foreign interference or federal election crimes, we're going to aggressively investigate and work with our partners to quickly take appropriate action. We're also coordinating with the private sector, both technology and social media companies, to make sure that their platforms aren't used by foreign adversaries to spread disinformation and propaganda.
Have the potential hacks on the election system, have they increased since 2016?
2016, we were a little bit caught flat-footed. We caught the action relatively late. I think the good news is that even though there are probably more players going against us, and folks like the Russians and the Chinese haven't abated, we are in a much better position to detect it. Every locality is now aware of the threat, and so they're watching their networks, and there's a war room set up in Washington to be able to help all of them when we see events. So it's a much better network of protection than we had in 2016.
Microsoft's Tom Burt says the company is working around the clock to track and prevent potential threats, including working to disrupt a criminal computer network called TrickBot, known for spreading ransomware.
Ransomware is one of the biggest threats to our election. TrickBot is one of the biggest distributors of ransomware. So we believe that by interfering with what TrickBot's trying to do, we can reduce the risk of ransomware affecting our election. That's not to say that there aren't threats, but we are much better prepared.
For ABC News Live, I'm Tom Yamas in New York.
Our thanks to Tom for that. And still ahead here on Prime, the United States isn't the only nation dealing with unrest. Later in the show, we'll tell you about the crisis in Thailand, where the unthinkable is happening. Calls for the king to step down. Amy Coney Barrett has her first day on the job as a Supreme Court justice. We'll tell you about her very first case. But up next, the presidential election isn't the only item on the ballot, from statehood to legalizing marijuana. We'll take a look at the various issues facing voters by the numbers. But first, our tweet of the day from the FBI. What to do if you witness an election crime.
In times like these, the news-making events happen here. ABC News.
President Trump meeting face-to-face with one of the world's most brutal dictators, Kim Jong-un.
The president.
Do you trust him? I do trust him, yeah. I think he trusts me, and I trust him.
Ivanka Trump.
I have to ask you about your emails. Your father had taken Hillary Clinton to task for this.
There just is no equivalency.
So the idea of lock her up doesn't apply to you?
No.
Comey.
How strange is it for you to sit here and compare the president to a mob boss?
Very strange. Michelle Obama.
What do you wish you could tell your pre-White House self?
Whew.
Melania Trump.
Do you think there's still people there that he can't trust?
Yes.
Still working now?
Yes.
Michael Cohen.
So he's still lying?
Yes.
It's a big statement.
And now, in a year with so much on the line, we're right there.
Good evening tonight from Washington, a very busy news night.
America's #1 news source, ABC News, straightforward.
We all need someone who'll pull no punches and give it to us straight. No bull, no spin. Now imagine getting your news like that. Just give it to me straight. ABC News, straightforward.
The time has finally come.
We have to win. This is the most important election in the history of our country.
I will draw on the best of us, not the worst. I will be an American president.
Who will be your next president?
I am your president of law and order.
I won't fan the flames of hate.
Election night, ABC.
We will make America great again.
This is a battle we will win, and we'll do it together.
ABC Election Night Live and on Apple News.
What's the most innovative daily news podcast out there to listen to every day? Well, the Edward R. Murrow Awards say it's Start Here, the daily news podcast from ABC News. Even the New York Times calls us a top news podcast worth listening to. Start Here, free on Apple Podcasts.
Welcome back, everybody. On the eve of Election Day, we are closely watching the presidential and congressional races across the country, but Americans are also voting on significant ballot initiatives. Now, these allow citizens to bypass their elected representatives and weigh in directly on an issue. So here are just a few of those issues by the numbers. 121 statewide ballot initiatives are up for a vote this election. 4 states, Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota, are voting on whether to legalize recreational marijuana. And one state, Oregon, could become the first in the country to decriminalize the possession of all drugs in small amounts, even cocaine and heroin. Now, they would use the money saved on drug enforcement to fund addiction and recovery programs. And Florida is voting on whether to raise the state's minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2026. Colorado could ban most abortions after 22 weeks of pregnancy. And California voters are deciding whether to repeal the state's 1996 ban on affirmative action for public colleges and government hires. And finally, for the 6th time, because perhaps the 6th time is the charm, Puerto Rico will vote on U.S. statehood, although this vote is only symbolic since it takes an act of Congress to admit new states. It's an issue that could be taken up, though, if Democrats win both the House and Senate. And still ahead here on Prime, if your phone has been inundated with political text messages, you are not alone. How you can stop it. And we're tracking an apparent terror attack in Vienna in multiple locations. The images still coming in at this hour. Plus, Prince William reveals he also had COVID-19, what we're learning about what he did while battling the virus. But first, a look at our top trending stories on abcnews.com.
Right now, this is part of the eye wall.
This procession of migrants goes back 2 miles.
There is going to be catastrophic damage.
This fire has made a run. You can see those flames shooting up into the sky.
We are on the jam-packed red carpet.
To the right, guys.
So this is the 4th weekend of protest.
Watch ABC News on location for Facebook Watch. The time has finally come.
We have to win. This is the most important election in the history of our country.
I will draw on the best of us, not the worst. I will be an American president.
Who will be your next president?
I am your president of law and order.
I won't fan the flames of hate.
Election night, ABC.
We will make America great again.
This is a battle we will win, and we'll do it together.
ABC Election Night Live and on Apple News.
The Americans here on the ground and the Iraqis. 18,000 tons. Patatas.
Ismail? David.
Over ground zero from Hurricane Michael. You can see just home after home.
David, nice to meet you.
This was your view.
My favorite view.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The presidential campaigns are reaching the end of the trail.
Tomorrow we are going to win this state, and we are going to win 4 more years in our great White House.
Folks, Ohio, one more day. One more day.
Tomorrow, the final votes will be cast for president, and both candidates are blanketing the battleground states. On the eve of the election, Joe Biden is zeroing in on Pennsylvania, the state that could ultimately tip the scales. President Trump won it by less than a point in 2016.
You know the good news, we're going to win anyway. We're going to shove it. We're going to win anyway.
Some of the final polling shows Biden with a lead in the Keystone State despite the race tightening. In his battleground blitz, running mate Kamala Harris is hitting eastern Pennsylvania with her husband, while Biden and his wife Jill are stumping in the western part of the state.
Presidents don't determine who gets to vote. Voters determine who's going to be the president.
For President Trump, behind in most major polling, it seems like a rough road to re-election, though his team remains confident of a victory. And after record numbers of early and mail-in voting, Trump is counting on a massive Election Day turnout.
Get out and vote. That's all I ask. Just take a little time and vote.
Out of Harris County, Texas, a judge has rejected a Republican effort to invalidate roughly 127,000 drive-through votes cast there in Harris County, saying he believes the plaintiffs who brought the case did not have standing to sue.
If the race is close, the candidates are preparing for a legal showdown.
Hurricane Eta is quickly gaining force as it heads for Central America, threatening flooding and landslides with maximum sustained winds of over 100 miles per hour. Forecasters say the storm could grow into a major hurricane before running ashore by early tomorrow, likely in Nicaragua, where it could bring rain measured in feet rather than inches.
Gunfire erupted in Vienna, Austria.
Police say gunmen with rifles opened fire in 6 locations, surveillance showing one of the attacks. At least one person killed, 15 wounded. Authorities say one gunman shot and killed by police. They are searching for other suspects tonight.
I saw the attacker running into various bars and restaurants. All bars and restaurants will be closed in Austria for the next month. A lot of people probably wanted to use that last evening to be able to go out.
Bail set at $2 million by a Wisconsin court for Illinois teenager Kyle Rittenhouse, accused of killing 2 people during a protest in Kenosha.
Summer, Kyle Rittenhouse made his first appearance via Zoom in a Wisconsin court this afternoon, days after he was extradited from Illinois. He is facing several charges, including first-degree intentional homicide. The incident occurred in August during a protest over the police shooting of Jacob Blake.
It turns out the coronavirus touched another member of the British royal family. Reports say Prince William caught it back in April, a few weeks after his father, Prince Charles, came down with the disease.
There are reports that Prince William struggled with the virus and had difficulty breathing. Now, with the Queen having left Buckingham Palace for Windsor, and it now confirmed that both her son and her grandson got COVID, shows once again that this is a virus that doesn't respect anyone.
In this home stretch of the 2020 campaign, chances are your cell phone has been hit by an unprecedented wave of political text messages, especially if you live in a battleground state. In the COVID era, when door knocking is unwelcome and phone calls can be annoying, text messages have become the trusted tool of politicians trying to get your attention. So our Devin Dwyer takes a look at what's behind the texting tidal wave, and if you choose, what you can do to stop them.
The political text messages are hitting like a tidal wave.
How often do you get text messages from a political campaign?
Every day.
A record number inundating voter cell phones in the final hours of the 2020 campaign.
We've definitely seen this year that more people, more campaigns are using it, and that is having an impact. I think people are getting a little bit frustrated.
The billions of messages from Democrats and Republicans eclipsing door knocks as the go-to voter outreach because of COVID-19.
So we had a texting party at my house, 6 women around the table. We had some wine, some cheese and crackers, and I gave them a little script to get them to encourage their friends and family to get out and vote.
The Get Out the Vote push is being propelled by special political texting apps.
How do you get the phone numbers?
So the voter files, so when you register to vote, that is public record.
The phone numbers are automatically teed up for armies of volunteers who send pre-scripted messages with the tap of a thumb, dozens per minute.
You have maybe 100 text messages assigned to you, and you just click send, and it sends off the message, and you send it to the next person, and you click send until you've sent it to everyone.
So every time you push that green button, a new name loads, and that's a new person, a new stranger.
A lot of people might think it's a robot. It's totally not. It's a human. It's a volunteer. You could be sitting, watching Netflix, just hanging out.
Most robocalls and robotexts are illegal without your consent, but the FCC says campaign outreach initiated by a real person is exempt from the do not call list.
Text messaging, even if you don't answer it, you still look at it, you still read it, right?
Professor Melissa Michelson says scientific research shows text messages have a direct positive impact on getting people to vote.
Per vote, it's very powerful, but if you want big effects, you still have to do those other tactics.
Those other tactics involve real human contact like canvassing, something Democrats have de-emphasized in the pandemic, while Republicans have been out in force.
This weekend they'll have over 100,000 doors knocked, well over 500,000 calls made. People are appreciative that, at this time of isolation that we actually want to hear their voice at the door.
But text messaging is still dominating on both sides.
And we're asking them, not only will you vote, but will you help your friends and your family to vote? Are there 3 people who you can support to vote?
Do you ever get any nasty grams back?
Sometimes, but overwhelmingly it's positive.
The onslaught of texts expected to the very end of the campaign.
I voted, leave me alone.
One way to get off the lists, text stop in reply, or you could just wait for the silence that will come after November 3rd. For ABC News Live, I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington.
Our thanks to Devin for that report. It's easy with so much uncertainty here at home to lose sight of the fact that political turbulence is not limited to the United States. Unprecedented times right now in Thailand. Tens of thousands have been taking to the streets demanding the resignation of the retired general who led a military coup in that nation and major changes to the monarchy. That second point is a big one because it has been forbidden in Thai culture to speak ill of the king. Yet, like with so much, things have changed in 2020. James Longman has more.
They call Thailand the land of smiles, but behind the facade, an ugly crackdown is playing out. Celebrated in lights, the king is almost a god in his own country, but he's lived in Germany for years, and so its embassy in Thailand has become a focus for protesters, angry at a largely absent monarch and an out-of-touch government. It's an astonishing and unprecedented call for reform, and it's been going on for months. Tens of thousands of protesters in Thailand have mobilized, led by the young, at times clashing with police. They're demanding the resignation of their prime minister, a former army chief who seized power in a 2014 coup. But perhaps more remarkable, they're calling to curb the king's authority.
The monarchy is the mastermind behind the politics. No matter how many governments we go through, if the monarchy is still pulling strings from behind it, the country will not develop any further.
Thailand has one of the strictest royal defamation laws in the world. Speaking negatively about the monarchy can carry prison sentences of up to 15 years, which means these young people are playing with fire. Protesters have incorporated the three-finger salute from the Hunger Games film franchise, a show of resistance against the authoritarian state. The government cracking down, banning public gatherings and arresting 3 high-profile protesters, one of whom appeared to be unconscious as he was being unloaded from a police van. But the threat of arrest hasn't deterred this new generation hungry for change. Many were first-time voters in the parliamentary elections last year, and they were upset by the results, saying it was a government fix to stay in power.
Military government just cheat the election result.
Alice is a 22-year-old content writer, and she's been rallying students. She says she's got friends who have been detained.
So how does it make you feel to know that this is what's happening in your country, that there are arrests of young people like this?
It makes me feel angry because, the authorities, the government, they take our future, they take our freedom.
And she too hasn't been immune from the response. She was summoned for violating the ban on demonstrations.
You have to report to the police How are you feeling about that?
Nervous a little bit. Oh, I don't know what's gonna happen next, but I don't think. Well, but I think my friends and I are gonna be safe, but still a little bit nervous. Yeah.
We were with her as she turned herself in. It was her second run-in with the law.
In this country, every time I exercise my basic right, I get summoned. It unnecessarily complicates my life. And the one who's pressing charges against me is the state. The police are the state's representative.
The state attorney is filing a case against her, and she'll report to the police again later this month.
I'm not afraid. I'll keep fighting.
In Bangkok and other cities across Thailand, the young have been vocal and unafraid. It's what makes these protests different from those of the past.
What very surprising me is that a younger generation appeared a lot. They're unhappy with the current situation, that they believe that they will face a worse future and economic opportunity when they grow up.
In an effort to save face, the Thai king appeared in front of pro-royalist supporters yesterday, and he had this message.
Is there any room for compromise, sir? Thank you. Thailand is a land of compromise.
What was once whispered about the king and the government is now shouted in the streets. But his military regime has to tread carefully. Thailand's reputation as a welcoming and friendly nation is in the balance. These young Thais hope that if they make enough noise, the world will hear and force the change they need. James Longman for ABC News Live.
Our thanks to James for that. And when we come back, many of them may not be able to vote yet, but teenagers are rallying around their candidates of choice by using TikTok. Stay with us.
Cross my office off the list. What if we pick for each other?
Please stop.
Friday nights, 9/8 Central. True crime, cinematic, real-life drama, stunning, the unthinkable. Follow the clues. The Hunt. True crime. 2020. Friday nights, 9/8 Central on ABC.
I've been quested to bring this one back to its kind.
You know this is no place for a child.
Wherever I go, he goes.
The Mandalorian, new season now streaming only on Disney+.
Meet the prince, pretending to be part of one of the world's richest royal families.
A con. So outrageous.
But
it was just the tip of the iceberg. I'm Whoopi Goldberg. This is the con.
All new and royally good. Wednesday on ABC.
The time has finally come.
We have to win. This is the most important election in the history of our country.
I will draw on the best of us, not the worst. I will be an American president.
Who will be your next president?
I am your president of law and order.
I won't fan the flames of hate.
Election night, ABC.
We will make America great again.
This is a battle we will win, and we'll do it together.
ABC Election Night Live and on Apple News.
Finally, tonight, you probably know TikTok for its viral dancing videos, but the popular app is becoming an online battleground for the next generation of voters. And even teens too young to vote are getting engaged. Rachel Scott has more.
As the campaigns make their final pitches, they're getting an unexpected assist on TikTok from teens.
I just want to give you a couple more facts that you should think about when deciding who you're going to vote for.
Kids too young to vote or just voting for the first time are part of what's being coined the Gen Z revolution, creating and running politically driven social media accounts like TikTok for Biden with over 800,000 followers and Republican Hype House with nearly 1 million followers.
I'd like to think of our account as a easier way to get involved politically, especially for that younger crowd.
And even forming super PACs. Jackie Nee started Meme Pack when he was 17, using TikTok to engage his peers to vote and working to limit the spread of misinformation.
Truth is very important to our organization, and we try to stand by it, and we don't try to nitpick or misrepresent.
For the youngest generation of voters, it's important to get the facts and get out the vote.
I've been living here in the United States for almost 30 years, but this is the first time I'm going to vote
to make a change and be a voice for my kids also. I'm not crying.
Jenna Limalaiba was convinced by her 3 daughters to vote this year for the very first time. The girls say they are politically engaged thanks to TikTok.
Unfortunately, I couldn't vote in the last election, and I made a promise to myself, and I also started bugging my parents, like, okay, next time we're all gonna vote together.
Did you ever think that it would be your daughters that would encourage you to get to the polls?
Not really, but they're persistent. I started listening to them, and then I realized that it really is for their future.
And in this high-stakes election, social media platforms are working overtime to keep young people from seeing false or misleading information. But according to the experts, spotting misinformation lies heavily on the users.
Once we flag something, it then goes to the teams that actually run their moderation policies. These days, it seems as though a lot of the young people are aware of this problem.
And for this family, the future of politics might look a lot like this.
All right, thanks to Rachel for that. And if you're dismissive about all of this, keep in mind that more than 15 million people turned 18 since the last presidential election. And before we go tonight, our image of the day. Do you believe in miracles? Well, take a look at this, and you just might. That's a train that plowed through a safety barrier in the Netherlands, but was stopped from plummeting 30 feet to the ground, all because of this water sculpture of a whale's tail. Fortunately, no one was injured. And that is our show for this hour. Reminder tonight, if you have not registered to vote yet in 22 states and Washington, D.C., you can still register at the polls tomorrow and exercise your sacred right. ABC News Live's special Election Day coverage begins tomorrow at 7 a.m. I'm Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us, and good night.